Eric, and thanks everyone. Wow, it feels really good to be in the room with you guys. A great group. Of course, big fans of Yes, have been for a long time. Robert Rogers, he, him. I've been working for Contra Costa County Supervisor John Joya's office for almost 7 years now. I do external communications for the office amongst many other duties. And as Eric alluded to, my background is in journalism. I worked for the Contra Costa Times for several years, and prior to that, worked at the San Bernardino County Sun in Southern California. I'm originally from Southern California. I moved to the Bay Area to go to grad school at Berkeley. I studied journalism there, and then also had a stint as a lecturer there at the journalism school. And now I live in the city of Richmond and have since 2012 with my wife and our 3 little ones. And so we're very happy to be part of this community. And I'm especially happy to be with you today. I know we're going to discuss some good stuff. We're going to go through it really fast. I'm going to also provide I'm going to sketch out some notes that'll be handy for your group later, in addition to the video that we take. I again apologize for not having a PowerPoint ready, been unable to schedule that. However, I promise our time will be fast, eventful, and fruitful and memorable. Start with an anecdote. It was mid-2020, pre-vaccine. We know what that was like. The surge in COVID was real. Hospitals were beginning to get overwhelmed. In particular, this was a global crisis, but in West County, we had especially acute problems. In particular, what concerned us at the county supervisor's office was the inadequate outreach and also messaging that would have enabled us to ensure that our most vulnerable communities, in particular, our Black and Brown communities and our immigrant communities, were getting the message properly about the precautions to take. And at that time, it was really about testing and isolation. This is pre-vaccine. Our normal communications channels seemed largely ineffective in moving that needle, in getting us to reduce the amount of spread in some of our most vulnerable communities. So we decided we needed to take special action. We needed to tailor our message in a way that would get more media outreach and reach our communities better. And so what did we decide to do? We knew that the COVID virus was the big picture. That was the topical issue that everyone in the world knew about. And we also knew that we needed to work on our sub-themes here in our communities. Our vulnerable communities are having higher levels of spread, a higher level of hospitalization and deaths. And we're also seeing people are often untrustworthy of civic institutions or just disengaged from those institutions. There can be language barriers and there can be other barriers as well. What we decided that we needed to do was advance a communications campaign, enlist the help of local media, and also have a culturally competent and effective message to provide. The idea was Supervisor Joya would work with Dr. Desmond Carson, one of our African-American physicians on the county staff, to work in a way that would reach out directly. And also, he happens to be known as someone who does not put on airs, someone who really speaks the language of the community. If you've heard Desmond Carson talk, Dr. Carson, you know what I'm talking about. He doesn't sound like your mom or dad's doctor, if you will, which is a good thing. And so what we decided to do 2 weeks out was we were going to create this campaign of we're speaking to the West County community about the dangers of COVID with Dr. Carson and Supervisor Joya. So we created a press release and we put together some photos and some other media, and we got to work. And what did that work entail? It started off with a news advisory a couple of weeks in advance, very scant on the details, but the big picture was a big message for our communities in West County from Dr. Carson. At the same time, we reached out to all area media organizations via our various social channels, tagging them, mentioning them, sliding into their DMs when appropriate, and so forth. At the same time, we were sending emails and also calling some of our favored press contacts to let them know this was coming. 1 week out, our full press release came out. And this one was a whole page along with links to our county health documents and all of the data involved. And then we did it a day out, and then we did it the morning of. That day, in front of the county health center, which we had chosen carefully as a great spot, visuals behind it, right there in the community, we were fortunate enough to have a bank of television and radio cameras and microphones, as well as print media on hand. The turnout was fantastic. The message was good. It was on all the local media that night. And we felt like our communications made a dent. We advanced that narrative. We dispelled some of the myths and some of the ideas. And if you can, I'll send this as part of the press packet, but you'll hear what he said. Dr. Carson directly addressed those issues of, should we get together for these holidays? Should we shut down the economy to save more lives? Can we continue on our normal course of action while literally bodies are piling up? And who's really dying and fighting from this disease to the greatest extent? Disproportionately, it was in our most vulnerable communities. So I found that to be a really successful instance, and one where we learned a lot in terms of how to not only advance the message and provide the tiered outreach over time, but also ensure that the message itself was one that was topical, interesting to the public, interesting to the press, and would get as wide a play as possible. So when you have whatever the event is, now this one benefited, of course, from being part of a massive global topic and an acute shortage here locally, and a trusted, exciting messenger in Dr. Carson. It had those advantages, but we don't need all the advantages all the time to have a successful press outreach campaign, nor do we want to forget that we want to use our advantages to the greatest extent possible in our press campaign. So how do we do that? Well, first, I want to just orient us briefly, and I know that Blanca and Eric have heard this bit before, but it's important to refresh briefly. I want to think about news values for journalists and for media, not because that's the role we want to play, but because we want to understand what's going on in their minds so that we can best appeal to them with the message that we want them to help us advance. Because ultimately, that's what this is all about. This is about working together. I'll get into why I have press contacts and press partners. Ultimately, it's about making your organization more effective to its constituents and its staff. News values, what are they? Well, there are 7 of them broadly, and you play around with the names. I have my own names for them, but I'll touch on them very briefly, and it'll orient us to have an idea. What are news values that journalists and organizations look for when they're selecting what story to cover? Because they have infinite choices. Well, they don't necessarily go down a matrix, but they have an idea. And the idea often involves some such as impact. What do I mean by impact? Well, this is a big one. When we're writing a story, when the media is covering a story, they're thinking about who is affected by this story, right? Some stories have very little impact. For instance, if there is a crime, like a stolen car ring or something is caught in Antioch, and my broadcast audience in San Francisco, my viewers may not have much impact on that. It might not be coming for their car, if you will, but they might like that story for other reasons. I'll get into them. On the other hand, there's big impact ones. Like, what if our audience is Richmond and we discover that, to continue on the car example, what if the stolen car ring is discovered in Richmond and this has been thwarted, and that's going to help people in Richmond community be safer? Well, that's a big impact. Another big impact would be like a story, for instance, on water rates. or rental rates. These are stories where you can presume that the vast majority of people are directly impacted, and therefore they lean in on that story, whether it's on the radio or the television or in print or you name the media, social media, of course. So think about that impact. You don't have to have it, but when you have it, it always helps your story get more play. Timeliness. This is a big one. It's an easy one, right? We all know about this. We intuitively understand. That's what news is, right? Oftentimes it's how timely is it? Something that happened just today or yesterday is for that reason elevated often from something that happened a month, a week, a year ago. Timeliness is big. Therefore, often what's going to happen in the future is even better, right? Because you have that impact when you have the timeliness on the future event. Now someone can participate. Now a media partner can cover. Timeliness is big. Prominence. This one can also be called something like celebrity, right? And of course, we understand this at the global scale, right? What's the most prominence possible? Well, probably like a story involving the president, or a story involving, the biggest pop star in the. I won't presume to know who that is. That's not my generation anymore, but you get the point, right? Stars, celebrity, things, people that people all know. Now, we also have prominence at the local level. This is important and interesting for our audience. I talked about the Dr. Desmond Carson anecdote earlier. Now, in Iowa, no one's going to know who Dr. Carson is, but in Richmond, a lot of people are going to know. Very prominent person. Similarly, members of your council might be prominent, or let's say an athlete or a Marshawn Lynch who lives in Richmond. Prominence is very big. If you have that in your story, use that. Yes has a degree of prominence, right? That should be included. We should be thinking about that and layering it into our communications as we find appropriate. Proximity, localness, if you will, right? This is big. Of course, your story in Nickel Park is a big deal to area media. It's a bigger deal to, say, the West County Times than it might be to the San Francisco Chronicle, but it could be a big deal to both. Proximity is very important. Bizarreness, okay? This one can also be thought of as a wackiness or unusualness, right? And this plays on our general human emotions, right? We find what's extraordinary captivating. We want to know more about that. So if you have a bizarreness angle, sometimes you don't need proximity, prominence, timeliness, anything, right? If you have something that's really incredible, then that could be something that gets attention, right? It might have nothing. Now, if you add it, it's often huge. For instance, if I have, let's say there's an amazing cat who has been taught to perform all kinds of tricks you wouldn't think possible. And that cat lives in a Richmond community member's house. You probably have a big story, right? You have timeliness, proximity, you have bizarreness, and you don't have impact, but you have those other three and they're big. And that could be really interesting. So is there something that's particularly interesting happening at your event in Nickel Park? The answer is yes, right? The mural is that. It may not be particularly bizarre in some ways, but it's something different. It's something fresh. And I haven't even gotten into what the content of the mural is, but I bet it's captivating. And I bet that it gets more captivating the way that you tell that story. Conflict. This is a big one. It probably isn't going to apply here, but news organizations, I don't probably need to tell you this, they love that, right? The conflict could be between a mayor and a council member. The conflict could be between two neighbors fighting over something. The conflict could be between the police department and the fire department. The conflict could be, let's say Yes wants to do some beautiful thing at Nickel Park and has exhausted all other options, but the Parks and Rec department won't give you a permit. There will be a conflict. That might be a strategy to move forward. Fortunately, there isn't one here, I imagine, but that's good for you to know. And lastly, this one is big, currency or topicalness, contemporariness, perhaps. And I like this one a lot. Now, the Dr. Carson example was very much on this, right? And that is big issue is COVID. And everybody's interested in that because that checks almost every box. That's in your backyard, that's impact, that's crazy, that's bizarre, it's all of it. On top of that, it's topical. It's the thought of the day. Anything that's connected to that gets elevated in the journalists and the public mind. So we use that, of course, with Dr. Carson's presentation. That may be something going on there. What if your mural was about a memorial for COVID, for instance, right? That would be a very currency heavy topical event. You'd want to play on that in your communications. The whole point of knowing all these is knowing what chords to strike when you're trying to get your message heard. Now I want to move forward a little bit, and I want to touch on some topics that Eric was good enough to provide me. And I'm going to hit those again as briefly as possible. We're at 1:28 p.m. right now. I want to leave ample time for discussion, feedback, and questions. Why does press coverage matter? Why is this beneficial to CBOs? Why do we care? And specifically, why do we care at Yes, right? Well, generally, story, narrative, topicalness, it's never been more important, right? You've probably heard about the decline of news media. We'll talk about that a little bit. That opens opportunity in other ways. But for the CBOs, thanks to the decline of media and the rise in digital tools and social communications, story and narrative has never been more important to what you do. And you've never had more capability, more exciting opportunities to make that story go farther and work harder for you. You have so much more control now than you had before. Now, Yes becomes the architect of its own story to a greater degree than at any other time in history. In the old days, we were way more reliant on the press. In fact, that was the only way often that we could reach a wider audience. Some CBOs, if they were well capitalized, might have had newsletters or so forth, and that would have been nice. But the press was the big thing to go for. Now, the CBO is the purveyor of its own identity. And why is that important? Not only because of your audience growing, and it should, but also it gives you this huge advantage when you are trying to get the press to adopt the story and adopt the various illustrations of who you are in the way that you want them to. In the old days, it was like you put together a press packet. Maybe you even made a video, you put it in a DVD or a VHS, you mailed it off, you spent all this time and work, you mailed it off to all these news desks. They probably didn't look at it. You probably didn't get any coverage. And then when something bad happened, they all came and broke down your door wanting that story, right? Now it's a much different time. Now your story is your responsibility 24/7, and you're always building it. I see, Yes, website, Twitter account, Facebook, Instagram, you're building that narrative's out there. It's built. You're doing it great. It's evolving constantly. And when the press comes, that's what they're going to look to also. And that's what's going to create the image in their mind. And so the contours, the colors are already there now. And they're much better than they used to be. All because you have more opportunity to do so. Why do we do this? Well, because it helps advance your cause. It helps with your constituents. It helps with your staff, helps people to know what it is that you're doing. It helps your staff be engaged in something larger. We all want to feel part of a bigger story. We all want to be able to take something from that. It vitalizes all of our efforts. It's also great for funders, right? It's great for partners. They need to see not only who we are, But how do they understand who we are? How does anybody understand who you are or I am or organization is? Well, I can tell you who I am all day, right? But the way you really come to the conclusion of who I am is when you watch what I do, when you see who I am. Well, it's the same with Yes. You could say your mission statement all day long, but when your constituents, media, partners, everybody, when they see that video or those photos of Yes doing amazing things with kids outdoors, that's what's created the story deep in their soul of who they are. And when they come to write your story, that's inescapably going to be part of the story that they create. So it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful opportunity. To recap, why does it matter, right? Free publicity, wider reach, great relationships moving forward. You never know how you have to call on these people again, right? They're just, the media is another partner, okay? You have to think of it that way. Independent validation, huge, right? You see, I mentioned before, I could tell you all day who I am, but what I do is going to tell you much more, right? It's going to be much more authentic. At the same time, I can tell you who I am. I can show you who I am all day. But if the Chronicle has it on their Twitter account or on their website, that might say it even more strongly, because the viewer of that knows I didn't control that. That's a third-party individual, independent valuation. And that's even more powerful. That's like an endorsement, right? So you want that. This enhances reach. And ultimately, this is all part of advancing your mission. I imagine we all do what we do, what you all do what you do, because you care about your community, you care about youth, right? This is what helps you make that better. Number 2, how has the media landscape changed? Well, in some ways it hasn't, right? There's still major institutions in the area and we still reach out to them. However, there have been a lot of big changes. When I started in news media in 2004, 2005 at the Sun, we would sit around the news desks and we'd check the mailbox. Yeah, there really was one. And we'd check the fax machine and we'd check our emails. And the news releases would just stream in all day long. And we'd sort through them, waste a bunch of paper, and one would get chosen typically. And that was about it, right? Very imperfect. And how you wrote that press release and the timing of it was really important. But all the other stuff, a lot of times people were sending packs of stuff and it didn't work. We just discard, discard, discard. You just pick what grabs your eye. Headline searching, okay? That was the old days. In some ways, today is better, right? Now, briefly more on the demise of newsrooms. We have the data. You know it already. Newsrooms are down like over 75% in the last 15 years. Local news, even worse, even more pronounced. The television, the radio, the web-based, they're all there, but they're all relying on fewer people to do more. Now, a lot of that sounds pretty bad, but at the same time, that opens space for your input. That's a vacuum where your narrative can slide in more easily. In my day, it was totally bad form to take a press release and basically rewrite the same thing. You had to go out and do your own story, so I would take nothing from the press release other than the contact info, basically, and the general idea. Now that's changed. Now organizations are using a lot from the press release, okay? Sometimes they're just sharing it, okay? So that means there's opportunity, and also there's a lot of more space there for you to advance your narrative with a receptive audience. It's also much easier to reach. I mentioned fax machines, mailboxes, and emails. Now the social channels are the best way to reach them, but the email should be used too. We'll get into that. But the bottom line is you want to have all of them on the standby. We had another old time thing. We had Rolodexes on our desk, with everybody's name and phone number. Now you should have everybody's social handles, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, have them all ready to go. All liked, all shared, create your own list. Twitter's good for that. And of course, have your own email list. To recap, media is fragmented, it's downsized, it's much more social media oriented, but it's also much more open to the inputs of our stories, of our narratives, of our content. And it's more reliant on what we have and also on imagery, right? In the old days, photos were almost never part of any of this. Now, photos and videos are often the first thing they see. Include that. Number 3, how do we reach out to these folks who cover our work? What's the timing in the advance of the work? How do we introduce ourselves and so forth? Okay, this goes to fragmentation. This is all, remember before it was email, fax, mailbox. Often ineffective, often overdone, very clunky, obviously. Now, the first thing you need to remember is there can't be too much, only too little. We know that journalists see 50, 100, 200 press releases a day, at least bits of information that they could consider, right? You limiting it to 1 or 2 over a week isn't going to help or hurt that situation. For them, it could only reduce your own voice. So more often and more ways, and tiered over time. You want variability in message. You want to hit the message in different ways over time. So let's say you have an event 2 weeks out. What I would basically say about that is I'd start with a news advisory, which is sort of like a press release light. And the idea is just a page that has like a headline and a couple of lines, and most importantly, who, what, where, when, like a table that says where this is going. I always think to yourself, I'm the journalist. What do I really need? I don't need the quotes. I don't need the context or the history. I need the tools that are going to allow me to cover this story in some way. I'm going to need contact information, and I'm going to definitely need who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? I got to know where it is, how to get there. And I also need a website where I can go for more resources. And I also want to see those other social channels. So I do a news advisory a couple weeks out to let them know, put this on your calendar, this event coming this day, because our calendars are all filling up and journalists are no different. Then in the weeks to come, I would be creating content around this, like this mural. Everybody's getting excited about this mural. This mural's a big deal for reason X, Y, and Z. And I tweet that and I Instagram that. I put a great photo up there. I do this, I do Facebook. And with that, I would tag all those major media organizations, RT, MT, whatever, right? You want that they are doing that. And there's assignment desks for Cron 4, KGO, all of those. Make sure that you've got to have your Rolodex tight. And in today's day and age, our Rolodex tight means the right emails, and even more importantly, all the right social channels. And then a few days before, like the week of, I'd send out my full press release. And then I'd do it again the night before. And then I'd do it again the morning of. That's about how often I do it, right? Remember, that the cost to sift through this in time and material is infinitely smaller than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if you wanted this kind of outreach, you have to basically send a book using dozens of stamps over. I mean, it'd be ridiculous, right? But now the channels and the tools are far easier and far more efficient. So to recap, reach out on multiple channels, reach out early and reach out late. There's much more danger of too little outreach than too much. More general information farther away, more specificity as we get closer. And always links to more resources. And the press release itself, one page. We'll get into that right now. Press release. How should we do them? When should we do them? Well, we should do them for all events. We should do it for other stuff too, by the way. Every press release is an opportunity, not just to get people to hear your story, but to advance your narrative. All journalists find value in press releases. Even if they delete them, they still found value. They want to be on that list. They want to get this stuff. Now, that said, the amazing conundrum is they all value them, but they spend less than a minute looking at them usually. It's got to be short. It's got to be tight. There's got to be an SEO ready headline. And that first sentence has got to have the who, what, where, when, why, and how. You've got to have it. You write it like a news story. This comes from the inverted pyramid style. And just the background of that, has anyone heard of inverted pyramid? Well, that came about literally in the 19th century. Very interesting. When telegraphs were the new communication tool. And it was sort of like Twitter, but it was just tapping buttons and it went over radio wires. And this was during the Civil War. And they created the inverted pyramid style to be able to purvey the communication as efficiently as possible. And also in the event that their communications got knocked out while they were doing it. So inverted pyramid means the most important stuff is at the top. And as it gets less important, it goes down farther. So your background details, your quotes and stuff, that's down at the bottom. What really matters has got to be the highest thing. Other tips for your press release itself. Brevity, eliminate the fluff, catchy headlines, SEO ready, search engine optimization. Always include the contact info. We need to know right when we pick it up, who do I call or email to get this going? If there's a fumble there, nothing else works. Be grammatically perfect, right? No mistakes, no errors. Have everybody look it over. One error, it shouldn't, but it does. It kind of ruins everything often. Provide links to more information rather than weigh down with more information. I'm going to wrap up quickly. How to talk to the media when and if you're interviewed. At the scene, on the phone. Spend some time prepping for this before it actually happens. What do you want to have going for you when you're talking to the media representative who's writing their story right there? Remember, they're always pressed for time. Positivity, conciseness, repetition, confidence. Okay? This is a great event. It's fantastic. Yes is doing great, right? That pervades everything. Concise, keep it short. That means even your phrases, keep them short and quotable. No run-on sentence, no rambling. Know what you're going to say. Repetition, know what you're going to say and say it over and over again, right? Now, sometimes that can be annoying in normal conversation. With the press, it's not. What gets repeated the most is most likely going to be what's in the story, okay? And confidence. You're in command of what you want to say. That's why you got to do the ideas beforehand. Talk to your group and understand what your narrative is going to be and what the ideas are that you definitely want any story to include, because those are the ones that you're going to be an echo on over and over and over again. You probably heard the old adage, don't always answer the question that you're asked, answer the question that you wish you were asked. Well, you want to do a little bit of that here. You want to be subtle, okay, but you want to do a little of that here. Lastly, exude confidence and clarity. Know your messages and repeat them. Never say no comment. That sounds confrontational. Just, talk your way around it if you have to. Never don't tell the truth about something. Always be honest, obviously. If a reporter suggests anything false, even kind of, press them on that. Get in there on that and try to disabuse them of that, because it'll wind up in the story. Always, be polite, but catch them. If there's anything even close to sounding like it might not be right, get in there and disabuse them of that notion as quick as possible. Don't ramble, don't repeat. And ask the reporter in the beginning and the end, what's the focus of the story as you see it? Hopefully it's what you want. If it's not, try to help them along toward that focus by the end of your conversation. So I'm going to close it up there. I'm going to just recap on those 5 points. We're doing really well here. I really appreciate your time. And I want to say that, remember, your story is your possession more than ever before. Advance it, build it. It's so powerful. It's so valuable. You own your story. You keep building it, and it's beautiful. The media landscape has changed. It's more fragmented, but there's more opportunities for us. We can always reach out too little. It's hard to reach out too much. Reach out more. Press releases, start with the general at the beginning, and then toward the end, get more specific. Inverted pyramid style and concise. And lastly, have a conversation internally so you're all on board. You know what the story is before you talk to the media about what the story is. So with that, let's let Yes move forward and have a great event. And Yes's story is going to be all over the place, I imagine. And with that, let's open up for questions and some dialogue. So to do this, why don't I'll go ahead. I guess we have 11 minutes. Why don't I raise your hand or raise your digital hand if you have any feedback, questions, other ideas, help me advance what we're doing here, something I missed, something that doesn't sound quite right, really anything. Let's talk. Now, while we're waiting, Sabrina, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. First of all, just thank you. That was very illuminating and just so much information packed in there. The only question that I have at the moment, which may be specific to, our organization or just other organizations that are this small, but when we're talking about including contact information in a press release, how do you know who is the best person within the organization to be listed as that contact person? Is it going to be the person who's leading that project, the person who has the relationship with the media? How do we know who we want that to be?
That's a great question. So first of all, forgive me if it's obvious, but that's an important internal discussion. You guys talk about that, you come to that conclusion. Now, what metrics around what it is or who it should be? Well, in my mind, there's a couple that come to mind right away. First is who is well, let's do the easiest one. The easiest one first is availability. This person has got to be available. Whether they're called, texted, any social channels, and the day of the event as well. They have got to be at the ready all the time. When the media wants you, you've got to be ready to go. Because otherwise, it's like I used to be a media person, and our attention spans are so short that if you don't pick up the phone when I call, I've forgotten about you by the next conversation I've had. So they got to be, availability is the best ability, first of all. Now, number two, who do you want to be your spokesman for this project? Now, there might be different people for different projects. Different people for different audiences, different places, right? There's a lot of things that might come to mind, diversity might be an issue. Background or speaking ability might be an issue. Familiarity with what we want to say is a really big issue. But I'm going to assume that everybody has it, but you definitely can't do it can't be like a perfect person in terms of this is the person we want to be out front, which there's all kinds of ways you decide that. Plus, they're always available, but they don't know the story or how to tell the story. That's not going to work, right? So you got to have all three. They've got to be available. They've got to be who you want to present for you that day. And they've got to be really in command of what the story is and how to make the press hear it.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Great question, Sabrina. Thank you. Others, questions, feedback, thoughts? So while we're waiting, I think that, one thing that I encourage all CBOs to always be thinking about is your identity, your mission, your story. Let's just call it our web-based identity. When you get Googled, you got to know what comes up. And do all of our channels, are they all filtering into the story that we want to tell? And do we have ample content on all these places? Where is it all, right? When you're writing that press release, you can't put Yes's organizational history on that press release. It's got to be one page. But I got to have a link that I can click on that's going to take me there. And it's got to tell the story the way you want it told. And then I always think about photos. You got to be always building up your photo archive. And they've got to be available. I don't know where they are, but like you've got to have photos all over Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And then like on the website, there ought to be a page of photos. And all these photos all the time, they got to be added to, and they've always got to show Yes in that most powerful light, right? We have more responsibility over our story than ever before. And because of that, we are all playing the role of editor and producer all the time. And we always have to be putting ourselves in our best possible light, because that's going to be what helps us tell our story and helps others tell stories about us. So always think about and this can go, by the way, to your personal life, your digital portfolio. You got to think about that. If you have, let's say you have some social channels that are they're not so professional, or they're just you being, whatever, that's fine. Have those, but think about creating a whole ecosystem of professional stuff on socials. You've probably all got LinkedIn accounts. Maybe you have other accounts that are attached to that are showing you in your best professional light.
Robert, one question that came up, and maybe you'll send this to us when you send over the packet, but in number 2, I asked, who are the press players in the community, right? Like, we know Richmond Standard, we know Richmond Pulse. Obviously, we want to be sending it to more than those two, but that's the sort of, as you filter down, that's who we're seeing put out most of the stories these days.
Yep.
Are there any others that we should keep in mind as we build this portfolio? And is that something that you can help us with as far as contacts go?
Yes and yes. And first of all, on the little ones, like people ask me about Richmond Standard all the time. One thing that's great about Richmond Standard is like they don't do the greatest journalism, and of course they're funded by Chevron, and that has a whole host of ethical issues. However, they do have high reach on their SEOs. They pay for it. And what I've seen many times is if you get them to bite, it's easier to get them to bite on your story. If they tell your story, then what does that do? That gives you that third party, that independent validation. So now you have a story by another publication. And what is that? That signals to the other ones. Oh, because the press is pack animals. Once the Chronicle does your story, it's way easier to get somebody else to do your story. And it's the same with the Standard as well. So as far as who, yes, Standard and Pulse come to mind right away. Then there's, the Contra Costa Times or the West County Times. and there's Richmond Confidential. And then you do your research, and you look at it's Bay Area wide, it's like regional, but Cron 4, KPIX, KTVU, KQED, all of these, right? Everything, you consider them all within your ecosystem. They're not all going to come to every event, and many of them are much less likely to come, but they all ought to be part of your whole list. So, and when you do that, then you got to get the emails. Then remember, make those lists, especially on Twitter. Make a media list. It's fantastic, a great tool for that. And when you're telling your story and you want them to see it, you mention them on that. It's really powerful.
Robert, I super appreciated you sharing that first example. I remember that whole campaign, and just to hear like all the thinking that went behind that is so impressive. And I, just love the level of intentionality and the impact that that strategy had with the community. I mean, I remember seeing it and just being like, wow, yeah, that's how we should be speaking about this. So I'm just like totally blown away.
That's very kind of you, Blanca. Thank you so much. And yeah, that story really demonstrates the power of the messenger. Somebody was asking earlier, who should it be? In this case, Dr. Desmond Carson, we did a lot of good things around him to help him be successful, but ultimately it was his power as the messenger, as a doctor from the community who speaks the community's language, that was the most powerful force of all. All that we could have done as support staff was we could have fouled it up, right? But we helped him instead. But that was where the real magic was. So that for us in our thinking, what's powerful is that shows us that who our messenger is important, and how we craft our message is vitally important, and how we connect it with larger forces around us is often vitally important. So your most productive meeting, I think, is the one where you guys really talk about this mural, and you talk about what's the story of this mural, and you think about things like press values that I talked about, the kinds of things that make a story captivating or compelling to you are almost always the same things that make them captivating and compelling to a media member in the community. I only provided some, additional I guess, technical guideposts for that, but intuition's big. It's really powerful. What is it about this mural that's so outstanding? Maybe it was the way the community came together in a terrible time. Maybe the art of the mural is something that's gonna blow everybody's minds, or it's about COVID, or maybe this new spot is going to reclaim an area that hasn't been used, or whatever. What is that story about this mural? Because it's more than just beautiful paint on a wall and people doing it. It's much, much more. You want to capture that lightning in that bottle, and then you want to be able to use it all over the place. Maddie?
Thanks. It's a quick question, but earlier you mentioned, I think I remember you mentioning you would do a press release for events, and then you said, but not only for events, there are other things that you might want to do press releases around. I was wondering if you could go back to that. What other types of sort of news would you kind of steer us towards? Sure.
Well, for me, it's stuff like, it's like policy foreshadowing. This policy is going to be put in place next week, right? Another one would be policy or idea advancement, right? Supervisor Joya is championing making COVID disinformation a public health crisis, or declared a public health crisis. We did this, by the way. So you want to advance that idea and get people to hear it and support it, right? So it's persuasive in that case. In the other case, it's about education, letting people know what's coming. Another one might be to highlight a problem coming up, right? We're going to have a shortfall next year in this, and we need you to know about this. So, or it could be something bad that happened or good that happened before, right? We do a press release about something that happened after the fact. Now, if I'm thinking about yes, what would your press releases be for? Well, they'd certainly be for events that you want people to know about. It might also be about, a challenge you're facing, right? Maybe yes, needs to find more youth for its programs, or maybe yes needs new partners, or maybe yes has lost a particular funding source and needs a new one, or maybe yes is starting a new CEO search. All of those things could be press friendly. The question is always not what do I need a press release for? It's always what story do I need the public to know about us?
Robert, I have a question. My program specifically focuses on the war on drugs and reducing access of marijuana to underage youth. How are there any strategies for if myself or the participants are talking about cannabis without saying anything about the organization's stance on cannabis, whether we're for or against marijuana, because that's not the focus for the program?
Yeah. So what's not focused has got to be drastically de-emphasized. And in fact, in that case, it sounds like what the answer would be is you just focus on the topic that you alluded to in the beginning, the one that you really want to advance, right? The war on drugs, that thing, right? You want to focus totally on that, and you don't even want to mention the organization's stance on it, right? However, you want to have a discussion internally with the organization to decide how is it that we are going to explain our position on this when asked. In all your pre-work, the most important thing, you can't envision or foresee every question, but you definitely want to, put on that other hat. You want to get in someone else's shoes and think about what they might ask. And you want to be in agreement. You want to give some thought to and understand how you're going to answer every question. So my short answer to that is don't even talk about it in all your releases. Just overlook that. And if it comes up, have a very concise, clear, and an answer that moves you off of that point, because you obviously don't want that point to overshadow the thrust of what you want to say. Well, we're at 2:05. I am happy to go farther if there are any, but if there are not, we could also wrap here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robert. Yeah, I certainly, if anyone has any other burning questions, please feel free to ask them. One thought I had was just going a little bit deeper with our mural project. For those of you who might want to stick around, I'm thinking, depending on your schedules, Joe, Sabrina, anyone else who might be interested, maybe we could spend another 5 minutes unpacking that and hitting some of those, 7 news value points that you started with, Robert, to see if there's anything there that we want to, sort of come around with our different themes. So before, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Can you, Eric? Can you give me, has anyone ever heard of the phrase elevator pitch? Yeah. Can you give me the elevator pitch of what the mural is and why we should care?
I feel like the best spokesperson in this instance is Joanna. Not to put her on the spot. I'm happy to do it, but I want to give Joanna the opportunity.
And Joanna, while you're thinking, I don't want to put too fine a point on it with elevator pitch and this jargon, but another way to think about it, the way I like my best is I call it the person on the street. If I was walking down the street and you ran up to me and you had to tell me what was going on, knowing that I'm only going to listen for like 10 or 20 seconds probably, how would you tell me? You know, so the point is, it's supposed to be really relaxed and really breezy.
Sorry, I am feeling a little, I'm not feeling super confident how to say it, but you know, this is a youth-led project, and the focus is to beautify the space and create a space where youth, other youth and community members feel safe and feel that like, yeah.
That's very good. Why this area? Why this spot?
Well, it's a very big park, and it's at the heart of the city, and it's a park that doesn't have a lot of art or didn't have a garden. And so it's something that after a survey that the youth led, received a lot of feedback on that. And so thankfully we used that data to apply for the Love Your Block grant, and that's what made it possible. And
Do you know what the mural is yet?
Yeah, so the mural has a lot of nature, has sports, it's a blend, and I think it's really valuable because it had a lot of community input.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, based on what you're saying, it sounds like what's most compelling to me probably is youth-led project, right?
Mm-hmm.
When the youth taking control, doing this, being enabled by Yes, that's big. Youth art, youth creating art in the city. And then number two, it's the park itself. You know, this, I mean, I don't want to, you know, play it up too much if it's not really the truth, obviously. But if the space is dead, or the space is underutilized, or the space is seen as unsafe or ugly, or there's something wrong with it, this restoration of an incredible space at a historic park, that's part of it too. So it sounds like what you're saying is, you know, youth-led beautification of a largely abandoned historic park. Wow, that sounds interesting.
When you put it that way, yes. And when you think of how it looked before the mural, it did look pretty abandoned, I would say. And where we have the garden now, it had nothing and it wasn't being utilized. So I think those are two big points that we could definitely focus on.
Great job.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, Eric, if there's nothing else from me, maybe I should sign off and let you guys have your internal discussions.
That's great, Robert. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for the big overview, for setting the stage for us, get our creative juices flowing. You and I will be in touch. We'll look for some follow-up materials, and just so grateful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just say, I'm so grateful to be invited. Thank you, Eric. Seeing all your faces, hearing you introduce yourselves. It's been the highlight of my Monday. And that, you know, it's been a good Monday too. So that's a big highlight. And so I really appreciate it. And most importantly, yes, keep on keeping on. You guys do amazing work. I've known Eric and Blanca for a long time, and really, really admire you guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.